What's up, Barnhill family, and welcome back to your home for all things combat sports.
Yo.
So, Nick, I saw a clip the other day from Brendan Schaub that I slightly disagree with, and it was in regards to the PFL. No matter how much money they throw into the equation, no matter what they do, the UFC has all things MMA on lock. It will be that way forevermore, and there's zero chance that there can ever be a legit competitor. And here's why I slightly disagree with that. You know, we just saw their championship event, the end of the year event where they hand out the $1 million checks to the champion in each division.
Yeah.
And I think now that they have signed Bellator underneath their banner and they're paying these astronomical amounts of money to each champion, that there is a potential for them to become a real legitimate competitor. And the reason for that is the signing of young prospects.
Right.
I don't believe that you can build an MMA promotion on signing a 40-plus-year-old Chael Sonnen or signing a 45-year-old Yoel Romero or even Fedor Emelianenko, who's
Right.
more famous than both of them as far as MMA competition and accolades are concerned. That's not a sustainable model. But what is a sustainable model is getting the best new talent and then using your distribution network, which is the same as the UFC's and ESPN, to really grow those fighters
Right.
to the point where they can become pay-per-view stars. And I think that these fighters now, they're looking at the UFC saying, you know what? This guy got knocked out on the prelims making 10-10, and now he just got cut $1 million check. I think I'm going to take a long, hard look if I'm a 19, 20, 21-year-old prospect about signing with a company where I got a potential to make $1 million as opposed to a company that's going to throw me to the highest level of competition and pay me $10,000 to do so.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And young kids, when they're getting into sports and athletics and they want to become professional athletes and really take that dive into a very difficult profession to get into, they're doing it for the financial gain. They call this prize fighting for a reason. You want to go out there and fight for the biggest prizes possible. And then you realize so many people, they get lost in their dreams and like, man, I'd love to become the greatest fighter in the world. And I respect anybody that says that and has that sort of goal in mind. Nothing cooler than leaving an amazing legacy for your sport, for your family to be proud of, for you to be proud of when you retire. But at the end of the day, sports are a business. It's entertainment. All of that means you need to make some money. And if you're going to, basically destroy your body and risk your life every time you go out to do your job, you need to be getting paid well for it. You need to be compensated financially in a way that you feel okay. And unfortunately, for the longest time, the UFC has kind of looked like the bad guys in the sport because they're not really paying people very much money, and especially compared to what people are getting paid in other professional sports, not only just sports in general, but combat sports as well. And, they've kind of gotten away with this because they were the only show in town. Nobody really knew how much a cage fighter should be making. So 10-10 sounds like a good number. And when you came from the regional scene where you were making 800 and 800, a jump up to 10-10 is a nice significant pay grade. But when you're talking about third string quarterbacks in the NFL making like $250,000 to never even put their shoulder pads and helmet on, it's a little bit crazy to see a guy that's risking his life fighting year-round, training in and out of training camps. And when he's not doing his own training camp, he's in there with another killer, helping him get ready and putting more damage on his body and putting more miles on his body, all for the chance to go out there and try to make $20,000. And that's before you have to pay your managers, before you have to pay your coaches, before you have to pay your taxes. It's a very tough life for fighters. Everybody always says, fighting is probably the hardest way to make a living, but they don't realize that the living that they're making at the highest levels right now ain't that much of a living. You'd be better off going and flipping burgers somewhere or just trying to get a regular run-of-the-mill job. Obviously, the glory and the legacy doesn't come with that, but at the same time, when you're trying to provide financially, when you're trying to be a young man that's trying to find his footing in this world, it makes a lot of sense to go where the money is. And if PFL is out there and they're willing to offer good paydays for these people, then all these guys need to take a second look at PFL and say, you know what, at the end of the day, if the UFC is the creme de la creme, it got there because there was no other show in town. But if the PFL is paying everybody better and they're able to increase the level of competition and bring the promotion to an equal or even surpass the UFC's level, now we're talking about that becoming the creme de la creme, and now I'm getting paid more money, and I'm on just as premier of an organization.
Yeah, and I think that the PFL is doing a lot of things to be friendly to the new generation of prospects.
Yeah.
One, they're giving them the option of making $1 million, which is incredible.
Right.
Two, they now have Bellator. So the fighters, the CEO of the PFL said the fighters can even interchange depending on what stage of their career they're in, what makes more sense. So the ability to go over and fight in Europe, which is where most of the Bellator events are going to happen, and build your fan base there, come back and maybe compete in the season of the PFL, which is going to take place in the United States for the most part. And then you have all of these junior leagues. Francis Ngannou is heading up the PFL Developmental League for Africa. So a whole subset of talent is going to come out of there and really start to excel, and they're all going to be fed right into the PFL. And I think, the saying, a rising tide lifts all ships, comes to mind here. Will the PFL surpass the UFC as far as name recognition and stardom? Not anytime soon. It's unlikely. The UFC, Dana White, they have done an amazing thing to create the product that we all love today.
Right.
And it will be very hard to surpass that. But I think having a real legit competitor is only going to help out the UFC fighters, because if all of a sudden the Aaron Picos and the Conor McGregors, the Paddy Pimbletts, the people that are building a big name for themselves, young guys and other organizations are all of a sudden signing with the PFL because they have the opportunity to make $1 million. They have the opportunity to fight on a Francis Ngannou and Jake Paul pay-per-view, where they already said the pay-per-view split is going to trickle down to all fighters, and it's going to be a way better split than the UFC is giving. I think some of these guys, and the competition's not going to be nearly what it is, at least in the beginning,
right,
compared to the UFC. So it's like, man, I can make $50,000 a fight and get a potential to make $1 million and to get a little bit of a pay-per-view cut to fight guys that are lesser than guys that I'm going to get paid $10,000 for. I think that all of a sudden you're going to start to see some really good fighters sign with the PFL, which will make the UFC, will force the UFC to take note and say, hey, we got it. We're losing some really good guys and some people that have eyes on them already prior to their signing. We need to do something to start enticing these guys back. Otherwise, the PFL is going to have a stable of fighters that everybody wants to see. And that's how you build your pay-per-view stars. You get a guy who's got a lot of promise, got a lot of prospect, and you build him. Right. And you build him to the point where he's a pay-per-view star. And it takes 4, 5, 6 pay-per-view stars to have an organization that competes with the UFC. Because let's be honest, right now, there really is only 4 to 6 guys in the UFC right now that you can put on the top of a pay-per-view, and it will do any semblance of numbers. So if the PFL can get their 4 to 6 guys that everybody wants to see and is willing to pay $50, $60, $80 to see, they can make some moves.
Yeah, those are some great points. And I think the PFL needs to focus on really rising the competition and the level of the organization, the promotion, the fighters, and start looking at these new signees like you're talking about. And I really like that they were able to intertwine their fighters in between. So if you have a guy that you signed to the PFL, like let's say AJ McKee comes over, I think he'd be a great fit for the PFL tournament at 145.
Oh, yeah.
But if he signed with the UFC, he wouldn't be getting paid near what he's getting, and he wouldn't be getting these opportunities. He was getting Grand Prix Bellator fights for $1 million. And then, if he's able to go to the PFL and he can try to get into the tournament, he could look for more millions of dollars. And, in 5 years, AJ McKee, with all the skills that he has, and he's still such a young guy, he could be worth several $1 million. And that's not what most people on the UFC's roster are even going to be able to say at the end of their long careers. So I really think they need to take all of these young fighters that Bellator has built up. Don't worry about all the old dinosaurs. Let them go headline stuff over in Europe. That's totally fine. Bring these new guys up and then scour the earth for new talent. Like they have this new prospect league. I think that's great. Go get to these regional scenes and really start to tap in. Go viral with some great moments and then bring these guys up. Just like Dana White's doing with his Contender Series. That show has proven to be really great for not only giving us great fights because people know that there's a UFC contract on the line, but it's also bringing the level of competition on the show up. And I think if you've got PFL prospects leagues all over the world popping up, you're going to see guys fighting for their lives, not only to get out of their opportunity that they're in now, but to get to the PFL. And then once they get to the PFL, they're one step closer to that $1 million a year tournament. I think that there's a lot of things that the PFL can do to push this thing forward and really give the UFC a solid run for their money. But like you said, it's not a short game. This is a very long play that they're looking at doing. And I think as long as Bellator has some great guys built up that they've done, and they're able to continue, giving fighters basically a pasture that they can go and retire on, then keep them around. But for the most part, PFL needs to come out, establish themselves as the second best premier organization in the entire world, and just be willing to do whatever it takes to rise this organization, rise the promotion, and get the PFL known to the world.
Yeah, and that was a great point you made about AJ McKee, because he's got the opportunity to become a millionaire time and time again, year after year after year. Whereas if you were to take him and put him in the UFC right now, it's like, here's $100,000 and here's Volkanovski. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like
good luck.
Yeah, good luck. That's a no. Or Ilya Topuria. You know what? Pick Max Holloway.
Right.
You pick your poison. Any of those guys could beat you on any given day for 10 times less the money than you can make just winning this tournament time and time again. So I think that there really is a clear-cut model here for the PFL to compete. It will take at least a decade for them to get to the point where they're equal or better than the UFC, if that day ever comes. Yeah. But I do think that this is a situation that's good for all fighters, including those signed to the UFC banner, because the UFC is going to realize that they're going to have to step up the pay. They make enough money, they profit enough to pay the fighters more. And if they don't, if they keep with this 10 and 10 sort of archaic payment structure, the PFL is going to start taking some of the best signees, and then they're going to start building some of those signees into stars.
I totally agree. And one other thing, the UFC absolutely is the gold standard for all of combat sports, and the PFL needs to study them and really focus on exactly what the UFC did, all the way from how they built stars to how they got rid of people that were no longer, beneficial to them. And then one last thing that's so important is there's got to be stars that don't compete inside the octagon. Joe Rogan is the biggest name in all of podcasting. He's one of the most famous people on the planet. Dana White is now one of the most famous people on the planet, and he never throws a punch. Bruce Buffer is always in there announcing. If the PFL can start to grab some big names and put them on the payroll and give them meaningful jobs just like the UFC has, I think you can really start to touch different markets that they weren't touching before.
Great point.